It began on a sweltering summer day in 1518 on a quiet cobblestone street in the city of Strasbourg. It began with one woman. Her name was Frau Trophia. For no apparent reason, she stepped out of her home and began to dance. What you haven't been told is how the city's authorities, in a desperate attempt to cure the disease, turned themselves into its most effective executioners. This is murky history, and we pull back the curtain on the stories you thought you knew. For the first few days, her neighbors watched with a mixture of amusement and pity. A woman gone mad, perhaps a domestic dispute that had broken her spirit. But when she didn't stop, and when others began to join her, their expressions curdled into fear. First a handful, then dozens. They were men, women, and children, all moving with the same uncontrolled, agonizing energy. They were not dancing asterisk with asterisk each other. They were dancing in a state of private torment, their bodies jerking and flailing as if puppeteered by unseen force. These accounts take months of research to piece together. If you believe they deserve to be told, consider subscribing to join our journey into the shadows. There was no music. Her face was a mask of grim determination. The year 1518 was not a good time to be alive in the Holy Roman Empire. The city was a pressure cooker of misery. Famine had stalked the land for years, driving the price of grain to astronomical heights. The poor were starving, subsisting on bread made from little more than chaff and desperation. Disease was a constant, unwelcome neighbor. Syphilis, the French pox, was rampant. Smallpox and leprosy were facts of life. A thick blanket of religious fear and superstition smothered everything. People saw the hand of God or the devil in every misfortune, from a failed crop to a sudden illness. They prayed for deliverance, but for most, none came. She danced for hours, until she collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise again and continue her frantic, silent ballet. This was not a celebration. It was an affliction. Within a week, 30 more people had joined her. Within a month, 400 souls were caught in the grip of this bizarre plague, dancing relentlessly in the city squares. Many would dance until their hearts literally burst in their chests. This is the official, terrifying story of the dancing plague of 1518. But the accepted narrative, a simple case of mass hysteria, is just the surface. To understand the nightmare that befell Strasbourg, you must first understand the world its citizens inhabited. This was the world Frau Trophia stepped into when she began her macabre dance. The city's elite, the magistrates and guild leaders who ran Strasbourg from their comfortable halls, were baffled. They consulted the city's physicians. After examining the dancers, the authorities, to encourage the dancers to keep moving, to literally dance the fever away. The logic, however twisted, was that a structured, musical environment would help the process along. For a few days, Strasbourg became a city-wide, open-air asylum set to music. Citizens gathered to watch the spectacle, a morbid form of entertainment, but the crack was about to shatter. The cure was not working. People weren't getting better. They were getting worse. The constant motion, under the brutal July sun, was pushing their bodies past the breaking point. They danced on blistered, bleeding feet. Their faces were gaunt, their bodies racked with dehydration. And then, they began to die. One by one, they collapsed from heart attacks, strokes, and sheer exhaustion. The music, intended as medicine, had become a funeral dirge. The stage, built for healing, had become a platform for public execution. Believing they were acting on sound medical advice, decided to lean into the problem. They reasoned that if the dancers could just sweat the fever out, they would be cured. So they orchestrated a public health intervention of the most surreal kind. They cleared out 2 of the city's largest guild halls and the open-air horse market to create designated dancing areas. They even constructed a large wooden stage for the afflicted, as if this were a festival, not a plague. The doctors, relying on the ancient Greek theory of humors, reached a diagnosis. This was not a supernatural curse, they declared with professional confidence. It was a natural disease caused by hot blood in the brain. The blood had simply overheated. They reasoned and needed to be expelled. And what was the prescribed cure for this condition? More dancing. This decision marks the first fatal crack in the official story. And then, they did something even more astonishing. They hired musicians. Drummers and pipers were paid to provide a constant, driving rhythm. The death toll was climbing. The cure was now visibly, undeniably, a killer. The city council's confidence evaporated, replaced by raw panic. Realizing their catastrophic error, they performed a complete 180. This mold grows on rye, the primary grain used for bread by the poor of Strasbourg in 1518. When ingested, ergot is a potent poison. The region around Strasbourg, the Rhine Valley, was known to be a hotspot for ergot contamination. Historical accounts of the plague, though often dramatic, are specific about the nature of the movement. It was dancing. The limbs were moving in a coordinated, if frantic, way. This is different from the random, violent, full-body seizures typical of convulsive ergotism. Furthermore, there are few, if any, mentions of the other key symptoms of ergotism. The historical chroniclers are silent on the hallucinations or the telltale signs of gangrene. And most damningly, could hundreds of people, all suffering from poison-induced convulsions, really dance for days on end? The physical endurance required seems impossible for a body under neurological assault. The ergot theory, while scientifically tidy, doesn't quite fit the bizarre facts of the case. It explains a seizure, but it doesn't explain the sustained, horrifying dance. The trail has gone cold, pushing us to look for a culprit not in their bread, but in their minds. The timing fits. The damp conditions leading up to the summer of 1518 would have been perfect for the fungus to thrive on the rye harvest. For a long time, ergotism was the leading scientific explanation for the dancing plague. It contains ergotamin, a chemical from which LSD was first synthesized. Ergotism, the disease caused by consuming the fungus, has two primary forms. One is gangrenous, causing the flesh of the extremities to rot and fall off. The other is convulsive, leading to violent muscle spasms, tremors, and vivid hallucinations. They issued a strict ban on all public dancing and music. The hired musicians were dismissed, the stage dismantled. The official narrative had failed, and in its place, an older, more primal fear reasserted itself. This was the work of the divine. The blame was laid squarely at the feet of a Saint Vitus. According to a local legend, this Christian martyr had the power to inflict curses upon the sinful, and a primary symptom of his wrath was uncontrollable dancing. The diagnosis shifted from hot blood to divine anger. The solution was no longer medical, but spiritual. The remaining dancers, those who could still stand, were rounded up. They were loaded onto wagons and carted away to a shrine high in the Vosges Mountains, dedicated to Saint Vitus. There, they were made to pray for forgiveness, their bloody shoes placed as offerings on the altar. For some, this change of scenery and the forced rest seemed to work. The dancing slowly subsided. But the question remained, what had truly happened in Strasbourg? A saint's curse was an answer born of faith and fear, not evidence. To find a more rational explanation, investigators for centuries have followed the main trails. The first trail leads us to a biological culprit, a fungus called Claviceps purpurea, more commonly known as ergot. On the surface, this theory seems incredibly compelling. Convulsive ergotism could certainly explain the jerky, uncontrolled movements of the dancers. The hallucinations could explain their trance-like states. But, as we dig deeper, this theory starts to show its own cracks. If the poison wasn't in their food, where was it? The most chilling and widely accepted explanation today is that the poison was the environment itself. Let's revisit the pressure cooker we described in Part A. You have widespread, desperate starvation. You have rampant, terrifying diseases with no cure. And the climax of this tragedy, the role of the authorities. It was a combination of three things: the profound misery of the people, the power of a shared, terrifying belief, and the catastrophic incompetence of those in charge. The people of Strasbourg didn't just dance themselves to death. They were, in a very real sense, enabled and pushed toward their doom by the very people who were supposed to protect them. The music didn't stop until their bodies gave out, a haunting testament to the power of the human mind to break under pressure, and the power of authority to turn a crisis into a catastrophe. Their initial cure, the stage, the musicians, the forced public dancing was the single most catastrophic decision they could have made. By publicly validating the dancing a real phenomenon and creating a massive, highly visible stage for it, they amplified the suggestion tenfold. They created a feedback loop of hysteria. More people saw the public spectacle, their own anxieties were triggered, and they'd joined the dance. The authorities thought they were treating a disease of hot blood, but what they were actually doing was institutionalizing and encouraging a psychological contagion. They poured gasoline on the fire, transforming a localized outbreak into a city-wide epidemic. You have economic ruin and a sense of absolute powerlessness. Now, layer on top of that an all-encompassing religious belief system that interprets this suffering not as a product of social conditions, but as a sign of God's wrath and the devil's work. Your world is saturated with the belief in saints, demons, and curses. You live in a state of constant, low-grade terror. This is your reality. The dancing plague of 1518 is now seen as one of history's most extreme and deadliest examples of what is known as mass psychogenic illness, or more colloquially, mass hysteria. When she began to dance, she was unwittingly performing an act that already had a deep, terrifying meaning in the local culture, the curse of Saint Vitus. Her dance was a physical manifestation of the anxieties that everyone in the city was feeling. Others saw her, and in their own stressed and suggestible state, their brains latched onto this behavior. It was a psychological contagion. The belief that they could be afflicted by the curse was so powerful that an asterisk made them afflicted asterisk. Their minds, unable to cope with the immense stress of their lives, forced their bodies to act out the drama. This isn't to say the symptoms weren't real. The exhaustion, the pain, the heart attacks, they were devastatingly real. Mass psychogenic illness is a condition where extreme psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms, spreading rapidly through a cohesive and vulnerable group. It's a collective nervous breakdown, and the people of Strasbourg in 1518 were the most vulnerable group imaginable. Now, we connect the dots. Into this tinderbox walks Frau Trophia. We will never know what specific trauma triggered her, but she became the spark. This is the true revelation. The horror in just the dancing. It's the perfect storm that made it possible. The true plague was not a germ or a fungus. The dancing in Strasbourg eventually faded. By early September, the last of the afflicted had either died or recovered. The city slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Forever scarred by the summer, its people danced to death. The event became a dark legend, a bizarre footnote in European history. But to dismiss it as a strange, one-off event from a superstitious past is to miss its most vital and disturbing lesson. The dancing plague was not an isolated incident. It was a dramatic example of a pattern of human behavior that has repeated itself throughout history and continues to this day. The mechanism of mass hysteria is a timeless feature of the human psyche. Consider the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962. What started with a few schoolgirls giggling in a mission school in Tanzania spread to over 1,000 people across multiple villages, forcing schools to close. The symptoms were real, incapacitating laughter, crying, and pain, but the cause was purely psychological. In the late 1990s, a twitching epidemic broke out in a Louisiana high school, with students experiencing uncontrollable spasms. Doctors found no neurological cause. It was, again, mass psychogenic illness spreading among a stressed student body. The stage has changed, but the play remains the same. In the 16th century, the stage was a town square, and the contagion spread by sight and rumor. Today, the stage is the internet, and the contagion spreads at the speed of light. Think of viral social media challenges that lead to real-world injury. Think of financial panics, like a run on a bank, where fear of collapse becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that causes the collapse. One person's panic, broadcast to millions, can trigger a cascade of similar behavior. The journey into the heart of the dancing plague begins with a single woman and ends with a city in flames. Metaphorically speaking, we've seen how it wasn't a curse or a simple poison, but a perfect storm of poverty, fear. They are with us now, in our digital town squares and our global anxieties. It leads us to one final, lingering question to consider in the comments below. If a city could be convinced to dance itself to death, what are we being convinced of today? And a disastrously wrong-headed cure that fanned the flames of a psychological firestorm. The people of Strasbourg were the victims not just of a bizarre affliction, but of the very world they lived in. Their story is a stark reminder that when society itself becomes a pressure cooker, the human mind can, and will, find terrifying ways to release the steam. The events of 1518 are extreme, but the forces that drove them are not. If you found this investigation illuminating, please consider liking this video and sharing it. And for more deep dives into the hidden corners of our past, make sure you subscribe to Murky History. The core elements are always the same as they were in Strasbourg. First, you need a population under stress, an audience primed with anxiety, whether it's fear of economic collapse, social upheaval, or personal inadequacy. We are still profoundly susceptible to social contagion, especially when we are afraid. It reveals how easily a shared anxiety can manifest as a physical or behavioral reality. The story of Strasbourg is not just dark history. It's a vital, cautionary tale about the fragility of the human mind, the infectious nature of fear, and the responsibility of those in power. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question: what are the dances of our own era? What collective anxieties are we acting out, and who is providing the music? Second, you need a compelling, easily shareable symptom or belief. In 1518, it was a dance. Today, it could be a conspiracy theory, a stock tip, or a moral panic. Finally, you need a mechanism for rapid transmission. For Frau Trofia, it was the city's streets and the authorities' stage. For us, it's Twitter, TikTok, and 24-hour news cycles. The dancing plague serves as a terrifying mirror. It shows us that our sophisticated, modern minds are still running on ancient software.